We've just covered isometric sketching, so let's now go into perspective sketching. So perspective drawing offers the most realistic three-dimensional view of all the pictorial methods because it shows the object in a manner that is most similar to how the human eye perceives the visual world. Now this is important because throughout history, artists did not understand how perspective worked. And it was only in the last 500 years or so that technique was discovered, and it radically changed how our pictorials and our art. So one of these examples, we'll look at first at a pre-perspective technique drawing. The first piece of art we're going to look at is from the 1429 or so. It depicts monks in a choir singing, and this one's interesting because it predates, it's before perspective drawing was really understood. And you notice some peculiar parts of this. We have some things that immediately jump to mind. We have this it's I don't know what you would call it. I'm sure it has an actual name for the object, but that when we look at it, it seems to have multiple sides. This looks really flat on top of it. We have the leader, right? We have the leader who is clearly a giant, and he's taller than everybody. He almost, if we look here, he almost touches the ceiling. We have the others, was clearly a child, not really, but we have a very, very small man who is attending the choir leader. We notice that there is what looks like doors here that appear very flat. We notice that the ceiling, we have this giant of a man and then the ceiling. So this all detracts, the lack of perspective technique detracts from the realism of the drawing. So let's look at another medieval or pre-Renaissance perspective technique. So this is a illuminated manuscript, and which basically means it's from a book, and that was meticulously painted. And we notice some things immediately about how the figures in this piece of art, in this page, look very, very, very flat. And we also notice that some weird, peculiar things are going on. Like the first thing that jumps out for me is we have this wall here, and it's currently this thick, but then when it gets to the back of the room, it is so much thicker. And that is from lack of perspective. This doesn't actually look this way in reality. That's how they were trying to depict two different rooms. And by not understanding perspective, then you have these jarring, glaring errors because it doesn't look real. And we view things in perspective. We have the same thing going on here as before. We have some very small people. And part of this is how they depicted servants from this time. But also part of it is how they depict or have the lack of perspective. So we have these two small servants, and then the larger people. So let's go ahead and look at some examples of Renaissance paintings that have perspective included in them. This slide depicts St. Peter healing a cripple and the raising of Tabitha. And you notice immediately that this looks much more realistic. It's still a painting. It's still hand-drawn and painted. But you notice that everything starts to look much more realistic. So and one way we know that they use perspective is we can actually go in and lay lines of this on top of the straight lines that exist in the drawing, and we can find the vanishing point. And we'll talk a little bit about the vanishing point in a little bit, but basically it's where all the lines in the drawing are trying to disappear at. When you're on the interstate and you see the road stretching out in front of you, it tends to coalesce to a point at the horizon. And this is exactly what this painting is doing. And this is exactly the technique that was discovered that allow painters to be much more realistic with their work. So we'll look at one more. This is the School of Athens by Raphael, not the Ninja Turtle, but the Italian master that the Ninja Turtle was named after. And Raphael used perspective to draw your eye to the center of the photograph, and most importantly, to the two people that he is highlighting in the photograph, which is Plato and Aristotle, because they were considered the fathers of the School of Athens. And when we lay in our perspective lines, you will notice that everything draws your eye immediately into the center of the drawing where the main focus, the main people that he wants to draw your eye to exist. So in our engineering perspective drawings, we're going to look at 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective drawings. And they change it slightly, and we'll go over what this means. But basically, it's how many vanishing points exist. Do you have one vanishing point? Do you have two vanishing points? Or do you have three vanishing points? In the 1-point perspective, it's relatively easy to make, but it's kind of weird. They use awkward here. It's kind of weird in appearance when you look at it versus the other type of pictorials. There's a horizon line that represents the horizon. There's one vanishing point that is on the horizon. And then a series of lines are drawn from particular points on the object to the vanishing point. And that is like terrible sketching on my part, but I'm using a mouse, so get over it. The next few slides are going to show steps in creating a 1-point perspective of the puzzle piece. So here's a 1-point perspective. I'm going to show you two different methods of creating a 1-point perspective in the puzzle piece. You'll have two different methods. You can choose whichever one you like or which one works best for the object that you're currently working with. I'm not going to talk through these. I have instructions or what we're doing on each slide. I'm just going to pause for like 3 seconds and then change. That way you can pause the video, do that, and follow along in this activity in your engineering notebook so you can get some practice that way. So once again, I'm not going to talk. Once we get down further, we can do that. I'll start back up again. So this is the second method. Well, I'm not going to speak during that unless I feel the need. You can follow along and pause with the space bar whenever you need to. Here are a couple of one-point perspective examples, and you'll notice that we left the construction lines in so you can see where the vanishing point is and the lines that are projecting to the vanishing point. And you can kind of see this is not the most realistic way to view the object, but it is certainly a little bit more realistic than isometrics. The two-point perspective is the most common perspective drawing. And once again, I'm going to do a step-by-step procedure. I'm not going to talk very much, if at all. And then remember that the two-point perspective is called the two-point because it has two vanishing points. So once again, the following slides show the steps in creating a two-point perspective of this puzzle piece shown below. So remember, you'll need to estimate the location of these to make the box proportional. So you have to guess, but do your best. So here's another example. It looks like a printer, and you'll notice that has the two vanishing points going to either side. So here's your vanishing point 1, here's your vanishing point number 2, and you'll notice that all the lines in that go to, except for the vertical ones, go to one of those 2 points. And that's why it's called a two-point perspective. Here's another example. We saw it before with the Singer sewing machine when we talked about sketching, and you'll see that even though the vanishing points are way, over disappearing somewhere over here, and then also way over up here, that it still uses perspective to make it look that way, look more realistic. A three-point perspective gives a worm's eye, whether if you're looking up at it as if you're a worm, or a bird's eye view as you're looking down on it as if you're a bird. So a worm's eye or a bird's eye view of an object. And typically we don't use this too much in engineering. We'll see this more in architecture, but you can use it if you so choose. So this is a three-point perspective. It has 3 vanishing points. So you'll notice it has vanishing point 1, it has vanishing point 2, and it has vanishing point 3. The difference is now we don't have any vertical lines. All the vertical lines are now going to vanishing point number 3. So we can last, and we're not going to go through a 3-point. If you want to try that on your own, I don't think there's any in your assignments. I think we just do 1s and 2s. But if you want to try that on your own, that is perfectly fine. Just a quick show you perspective versus isometric. So we have 2 here. We have perspective on the top and isometric on the bottom. And you will notice that immediately that the perspective drawn sketch looks much, much more realistic because the back end of the truck is getting smaller as it gets further away from you. And then the isometric, that's not happening, and it looks like the whole thing is a little bit twisted. So you'll notice that the vanishing point is way off in the distance, and that's fine. It makes it look better. Locating the vanishing point in a different spot will create a different view or a different look, but it still looks much more realistic than the isometric. You'll notice in the isometric all the horizontal lines, the depth lines, or the width lines, whatever you want to call those. Technically, it's the depth lines. The depth lines are all parallel. And here in the perspective, if we go the other way, you'll notice that this is probably a 3 or a 2-point. Might be a 3-point. It's hard to tell because there's not so much depth or the height of the object. But that's going off to another vanishing point. And then if we look at the isometrics in the width, they are parallel. So the 2 differences: perspective vanishes to a vanishing point, isometric still set at an angle, but they are parallel.